Assalamu alaikum. Hi everyone. Happy to be uploading again. That's my first video in 2 years. And I'm doing this one in English for a better reach and for it to be more helpful to anyone. This video is a bunch of copycat experiments I started recording on November 22. And here is it, finally putting it together. And there is no better time to finish and share it other than now with all the AI hype going on. So even though CopyCat has nothing to do with all the AI chaos out there, and it has been and still very limited with its own supervised closed machine learning nature since it was released, but it's also been always underrated, underused, although it can be super powerful, reliable, and time saver if we use it in the correct scenarios. And also recently, if we mix and use it along with another AI tools to replicate different effects and treatments. And that's mainly the purpose of this review, is to help myself and anyone watching this to better understand CopyCat and better decide when it's the right time to use it, discovering its strengths and weaknesses and highlighting important tutorials and experiments by other artists, and also for me personally to finally get rid of the accumulating training and recording files clutter in my drive. So let's get started. ماشي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So I started with this simple marker removal test on this famous old footage from Hollywood Camera Works. And if you're familiar with CopyCat, you know it's not much of a challenge here. It's a very easy task to do. So I just use this first one as an explainer to the overall setup and basics of CopyCat. So if you're already familiar with these, feel free to skip this first one and join me in the common experiments. The CopyCat node itself is a simple two inputs only node, an input and a ground truth input. The input is basically your raw plate, your before image, and the ground truth is the result we are trying to achieve, which is usually the reference frames we are providing to CopyCat to learn from. And the crucial and most important rule of any CopyCat training is that both input and ground truth must be identical in terms of resolution. Any crop, frame order, any color space has to be identical, except of course for the effect we are trying to create. So the only pixels that change will be, in this case, the marker we have painted out. And that difference is what CopyCat is going to be learning from and trying to create. In this shot, I'm using 4 reference frames, so the frame holded plates frames are coming directly into the red Aben clip, which puts them after each other in the connecting order. And it's important to have this frame range to limit the common footage range to only one frame instead of the 4 range, because if we don't have this, each frame hold will freeze for the 4 range, which is in this case at 227 frames multiplied by these 4 reference frames, which is going to give us like 900 something. And we don't need this to happen. So it's important to make sure you are providing single reference frames and to have this frame range node setting the footage output to only one frame. So that's how my setup will be looking throughout the review. The input side will be highlighted in red and the ground truth on the left will be in green. And the most important step before running the training is to double check that both sides are matching, as we mentioned. Otherwise, the training will fail. And to make sure you pre-render any heavy nodes, like I'm not doing here with the RotoBent, but it's really not optional. Pre-comp is a must with CopyCat, because if you don't do it, you're gonna get crazy longer unnecessary processing time. Because every time Nuke is learning from this frame, it's gonna repeat and recalculate this, and you're gonna get this crazy annoying RotoBent loading par, which is just maybe even take longer than the training itself. So it's really important to pre-comp for any serious training, and maybe organize your setup in a more cleaner and readable way than the quick setup I'm doing right here, which gets really messy like a spider web when it gets bigger. So yeah, maybe separate the input and the ground truth size completely and organize it in a less ugly way. So basically we have done the human part here by preparing the dataset, and the rest is for CopyCat to learn from the difference between the two sides, and the result will be the training model, or as it's called, the Nuke and inference node, which we will be using to apply the effect to the full footage range. Let's quickly go through the CopyCat node settings. First, you gotta choose a location to store your training data. Then the main setting is the epochs number, which represents the number of times CopyCat will process the whole dataset. And based on that number and the batch size, which is how many frames in the same time are being processed, you will get the total steps number. You can check the hint to understand this more. And to be honest, it doesn't matter at all because first, each different task will require a different number. For example, this sample shot with only 4 frames and a little effect area will just require a small ebox number, while a general training with like hundreds of frames and maybe a bigger effect area will require much bigger number to achieve a good quality. And second, because a stronger PC with stronger hardware will achieve this number faster than a slow laptop, for example. So you might want to start with a low number to test everything is working fine. Then you just keep raising your ebox number until you reach a quality that matches your ground truth quality. And that's it. You cannot go beyond your reference frames quality. So avoid overtraining with high ebox numbers. Once you hit start, the training preview will come up and CopyCat will be taking random crops from your reference frames, starting from the input on the left, then the ground truth, then the output result on the right, and it's doing 3 different batches in the same time. You can control the number of batches from here or leave it on auto and Nuke will decide based on your hardware. And you just need to keep your eyes on the output as it gets closer to the ground truth. As you can see on batch number 2, Nuke already started to remove the marker. And you will also notice that batch number 3 and batch number 1 doesn't even have any markers, which is totally fine because CopyCat also needs to learn that some areas will stay untouched and we don't want to change these areas. But as the training goes on, we notice lots of these unchanged crops, which if you think about it, makes the training slower, even though that Nuke doesn't really take much time to understand there is no difference between input and ground truth and just skips it, but still it takes time. So the best way to do here is just to crop the dataset completely and make sure you reduce these crops to the minimum and maybe just provide frame or 2 of these unchanged areas. And that will be really important later on in bigger training, but not in the simple one where I didn't do any cropping at all. You can decide how big the CopyCat crop size is from here. The default value of 256 will be sufficient for most of the small effects area, like these small markers here, while a larger crop size will let CopyCat learn how this area should look on the bigger image and understand the context of the effect better, but of course will cost us more time and memory. In the training location, we see CopyCat saves the PNG contact sheets of the progress every 100 frames as set here if you want to keep an eye on the progress. And these CAT files are the checkpoints and training steps it saves every 1000 frames as it is set here in the settings. For resuming, don't confuse yourself with this checkpoint in the initial weights drop menu. That's for a different purpose when you kickstart a training with a pre-trained CAT file. You don't have to use it here, and as it says in the hint, you just hit resume and it will back up from the latest step saved in that location. We see an error here as we already reached this 5000 e-boxes, so I'll just increase it and resume. After some training, we can both create an inference and test how good it will do in the for range. So the first thing to do is to compare the inference result against the exact ground truth reference frames to see how close we are getting to the ground truth. So even with my terrible roughly bended frames, I can tell we still need to train for more time to reach a better quality. Second thing is to do a playback and see how it does temporarily with the in-between frames and how good the transition is between the main reference frames, which is not a problem in this shot where all the painted frames are just the same shade of the bright green color that is easily consistent and matching between all the frames. But this transition between the frames gonna be a problem later in some other situations that we need to take care of and avoid. The other settings I didn't mention is initial weights, which is simply some under the hood pre-trained models that can help us get faster results for some specific tasks because Foundry trains these models on a huge number of shots. I mentioned this checkpoint to browse and backup CAT files, DeBluring tasks, upscaling, and human root scoping, and we will get back to these and more CatteryTools later on. Lastly is the use multi-resolution option that was added in the last version of Nuke, which is supposed to increase up the training speed by splitting it in a proxy-like approach. So stage 1 is low resolution footage training, then the medium resolution footage, then finally the fine details and the final quality you will reach in the final stage of the high resolution. Just be careful because this option doesn't work for people like me who just interrupt the training so many times. And especially that sometimes overnight, I just like put a crazy ebox number that I know I will never reach, but I just to keep the PC going forever, and I just interrupt it. So if you do this and interrupt it early, you might just interrupt it in the early first stage, so you get a low bad quality. So be careful while using this multi-resolution option. And lastly is the progress tab, where you can manage and see details for the different training you ran in the same training directory, with the training contact sheet and also a preview frame of the current model result. But the most important here is the loss graphs that shouldn't rise or stay high and should go down and flatten by the time, indicating a low loss values as we get closer to matching the ground truth frames. You can find more detailed explanation in this video number 12 from the CopyCat Masterclass by the Foundry's experts who built CopyCat, and that's generally a must-see and one of the most comprehensive CopyCat info out there, especially if you're new to CopyCat. For the second test, I went for something a little harder. That was a shot I combed before, and I remember spending days after getting the comb done just to remove the markers. And since it's visible in all the RGB channels, it was impossible to remove it with the channel merging tricks. So I ended up tracking, cloning, and painting it as usual. And no matter how easy it is, still these are lots of markers and it's just gonna take forever to paint them out. So that's actually here a good use of CopyCat. Here is my input face ground truth dataset. I painted the markers out in 5 frames, trying to choose the frames where people intersecting and bars intersecting with the markers. And that's it, 5 frames, trained overnight for 6 hours on my old laptop, and here is the result. It's matching exactly my painted frames quality, stable and brilliant around the edges and intersection with bars. And yes, there is a space to improve the training by improving your reference frames and retraining, especially around the bars here when I overexpose and contrast the footage. But since it does the job for the keying and that's only a test, I give it 10 out of 10 and move to something else. So this show was done in 2018, and I wish we had CopyCat back then. I know my colleagues at TrendVFX will relate to this because it had so many unnecessary markers in this show. I'll put the link to the breakdown done by the amazing TrendVFX team if you want to check this amazing work. And let's move on. On the third markers test, we have 2 footage from the same sequence. First one is a wide shot, and the second is from a different side angle. I started with a single training on the first shot only, with only 4 reference frames and low ebox numbers, increasing gradually until I reached a good quality at 35,000 eboxes, and the result was as good as expected. And if we take that inference node and apply it to the second shot, of course, the result will not be good. And that's normal because CopyCat isn't meant to be that smart yet. It's not like a brilliant AI tool that's gonna learn how to create that effect on any other footage. That's not how CopyCat works. Simply consider it as a 2D pixels manipulation tool that only works when it sees the exact pixels pattern, and it's very limited to the dataset we provide. So it needs to see the exact situation it's gonna deal with. So for example, here's a quick training to make CopyCat put these 2 criminal cats behind the bars. The inference is doing the job well, but it fails immediately as soon as the target pixels are rotated much or even scaled down or up, as the inference or the model isn't able to recognize the cat's initial pixels pattern anymore. And back to our test here, we need to let CopyCat train on some of the reference frames from the second shot as well. And now I have two datasets, and by taking the above first training append clips nodes and attaching them to the bottom append clips nodes, I have combined the two datasets into one with a total of 8 reference frames. Then ran the training till it reached 90,000 e-boxes, and here is my little general training result. It works great on the second shot, removed all the markers, and we reached the painting quality compared to the single trainings that didn't see that shot at all and did terrible removing the markers. And if we take that little general training and apply it to the first shot, it also works good. It even works better than the single training. But this may be only because it ran longer than the first one. And it also removed these small markers on the pillars because I also painted these out on the general training's reference frames. So the idea here is, even though that two shots are too little to be called a general training, but this shows us that as long as we provide CopyCat with a consistent reference frames that covers all the different angles of a situation, we can end up with models that can deal with that situation. Anyway, think that CopyCat isn't smart for this and needs to see the exact pixels pattern, and we're gonna end up making crazy effort to provide it with these data sets. And while yes, that's kinda true, but it won't be that hard because think about it, in a situation like this here, it's markers surrounded by a blue color, so the pixels pattern repetition possibility is so high between the shots. So let's say it's 100 shots in the sequence, you're not gonna provide reference frames for all of them. You're gonna just choose smartly your reference frames, and by processing few of the shots, you will find yourself already covered most of the possible pixels patterns. And the more data set CopyCat sees, the better it gets, the better the model will be able to process different shots, especially if you are a company or a person that already have an archived projects that you can train on. You already have the before and after, you already have your reference frames, so you can easily just train it on a big number of shots in order to use it on a similar sequence and so on. And that's the power of CopyCat, is processing on a sequence level a huge amount of shots in the same time. And that's the big reward at the end. So yeah, it's worth every effort making these models work. Removing these face markers was also as easy as expected. I'll be back to this lady later with an aging experiment. Nothing new to mention here with the markers. It is just 5 reference frames. And one good tip here I started doing lately is, instead of all these crops causing this crowd and to avoid mismatching the crops between the dataset pairs, a good idea is to clone a crop at the end and just animate it and forget about the cropping hassle. You will notice that easy planar camera movements, and when the target area pixels are solid and static surfaces that can be planar tracked easily, like in here, CopyCat always works well. Here's a 1 reference frame and 5-minute training result. Still blurry and needs to train for some time to reach the reference frames quality, but tracking wise our batch is sticking nicely. And since I didn't let CopyCat see any reference frames for the untouched surround areas, which is always important, so you would expect it to ruin the other areas, that's why I'm key mixing the effect only to the AC area here. Another similar situation here when CopyCats become so useful. A super long shot, about 850 frames, target is to remove that white dirt on his collar. Normal tracking isn't that hard, and you might also consider smart vectors, but still lots of work to do, defocus matching, and a lot of hassle in whatever manual way you use, especially if it's more than one shot. But with CopyCat, it's just few reference frames of different defocusing, and when his hand overlaps on top at the end, then some training time. I don't know how exactly long that was. I didn't note it down here. But the result is pretty good and stable. It did great till the end, even though my reference frames bend and strokes aren't really identical between the frames, but it transitioned between all of them slowly and seamlessly. And the result is just great if we overlook the other areas that needs to be excluded from the training. So let's give it 10 out of 10 and move on. Another test was a little work around here to remove these tags from the buffalo's ears. Trainer result works good for the screen left ear, but the screen right ear overlapping the body has some issues. The main problem with this bottom area is the tag that was here was moving the same way the ears moves. That is so clear when we take a look at the difference between my trainer result and the raw plate. And CopyCat surely will be moving these pixels the same way. And the second problem is the painting is inconsistent between my two reference frames, which is causing this sudden pop-in transition happening here. So to quickly fix that transition problem without having to make identical patches to the reference frames, and with this simple ear movements, I decided to go down to only one frame from the middle instead of two frames from the sides. And here is the result. It works good for the first part before the reference frame and also works good for the second part after the reference frame. Great, now that we have a good stable result for the foreground layer of the ear, let's focus and see how can we fix that bottom part and back body area now. While I couldn't think of a way to convince CopyCat to let me do a clean blade and just stick it to the body without CopyCat moving it along with the ears, but I managed to work around it, and I'll also require some help from, guess who, CopyCat. So back to the raw blade, I did a rough roto paint or transform mask to just clone the back area up just a little, enough to cover the bottom tag area. Now I need to bring my CopyCat result of the ear on top, but the issue is that we need a decent ear mat for this. It can't just be a garbage roto with these fine edge details and hairs. But don't worry, CopyCat is still here to help. In the same way you would do a rotoscoping with CopyCat, just pull in a quick Luma key. Now is a good time to paint or roto these fine hair details and obviously fill the core holes, but I'm too lazy to do it here for that test. Then just shuffling the alpha into the red channel and removing all the other channels, so it's only red channel here. So here is it, a one reference frame as ground truth, and here is our two sides checkup before running the training. Run the training for 30 minutes, and here's our inference node. The output is in red channel only, so I'm just shuffling it back into the alpha and pre-rendering, and let's take a look at the result. Nice, quick, and lovely matte. Testing it over the footage, and we see it's sticking great. Now I regret not adding the hair details, but that's okay. We can enhance it later. I'm just testing the method here. So taking this matte back in here and using it as a mask for the trained result to bring back the ear on top. Red color correction to see the used area here. Plus bringing back safe areas from the blade, plus the other screen left ear from the initial first CopyCat training result. And let's take a final look. Well, that's good. Now we can say we have a working setup. Was it worth this effort? I would say yes. The batch pixels tracking is really perfect, and literally you get it for free. It's effortless if compared with a normal tracking or smart vector with all its heaviness and the smearing. You know how smart vector like smears. I don't know how to describe this when it smears, and you have to like stitch many reference frames to make it work to the end. So yeah, the tracking is perfect here. I think it was really useful to use CopyCat here. I just had to help it with the body area. Maybe soon we could see matte inputs for a foreground background separation like we have on the smart vector node. And surely we need to enhance that edge details by going back to the matte and adding fine details, then retraining the model. But yeah, it was definitely worth it. So let's give it 8 out of 10 and move on. Another quick test here, removing the wire from the back of the actors with this kind of flying camera movement. With only 5 reference frames, the result is good and temporally stable. And generally, CopyCat does good excluding the foreground objects. Even with only 5 reference frames, it really managed to avoid affecting their arm, close edges, and the other guy's head. Going for something harder, a drone shot with orbiting around the field camera movement, and the target is to remove all the moving players in the field. Normally, I would just go chase each player and just paint and clone them out. You might think of approaching it with a 3D projection setup and clean patches, and that will require a really good camera tracking just to keep the lines and everything staying correct. But considering the shot is really long, it's worth trying CopyCat here. So providing lots of reference frames here, it's a big shot, so trying to cover all the angles. And here is the result of a few hours of training. Well, it does work in theory, but it's not good enough. Players are popping every now and then, and there is some kind of shadows passing, which is probably the inconsistent reference frames grading of the grass between my reference frames, and CopyCat is not transitioning well between them. Other than this, it looks good. So for these players showing up, it's understandable because I didn't provide reference frames for that exact situation with lights and metal bars overlapping the players, which is a new pixel pattern that CopyCat needs to learn how to deal with. So I think it's a matter of adding more reference frames for these drop frames where the player shows, and then continue the training for longer time. And of course, maybe enhancing the painting, but be careful if you enhance the painting of the reference frames, you're gonna reset the training completely and not continue because everything changes. But for me, for just the testing purpose, I'm satisfied that CopyCat can work here and it's overall working. The transition isn't that bad and it's maintaining the field line and all the grass shapes and all. And given the fact that was a few hours of training on this compressed MP4 footage from the internet, I would really be so happy if you give me this to start prepping from this point. So let's give it 7 out of 10 for the effort. I would say exactly the same here and even worse drop frames because these cars move to new places and not like the players surrounded by the same green field. So it's hard for few reference frames to cover all these situations. And you would excuse CopyCat if you see my quick, terrible rough painting here. I was mainly trying to see how it's gonna do with the road lanes, so I didn't care much about my painting quality, and it did good with the road lanes. Generally, to make something like this work on a good level, a decent reference frame painting is a must. Of course, running CopyCat longer enough to get good quality and sure fill in the dropping frames as much as we can. As you see here, this car crossing the bridge only disappears at the end because that's where my reference frame is. I didn't paint it out when it was in the middle of the bridge. If I did, it would have worked all across the bridge because you see how similar these pixels pattern is. And that's what I mean when I keep saying similar pixels pattern, because that's how CopyCat sees and recognizes the areas we are trying to affect. But for another car like this one, I think it would be impossible to remove it since it passes in front of different objects and just pixel pattern keeps changing. And it's impossible and not convenient to just add that much of reference frames. CopyCat has limits and sometimes it's not useful to use it in situations like this, especially with animated objects. So even after we spend some time enhancing this, we gotta accept that some cars will just escape the training and we have to bend them manually. Or you could just expose the footage like this and you're done. Just kidding. To be honest, one important thing to consider is not to run CopyCat on compressed internet footage like these two last experiments I did. Because pixels quality matters a lot with CopyCat. It doesn't only matter, it's the most important thing. It's all about pixel. So you can see an example like this, the sky tracking by CopyCat is all wobbly and weird because the pixels are super exposed with no range and very compressed footage. So yeah, it makes sense CopyCat will never work here. While in a good, decent footage here with some range and good pixels, it's gonna work nice. So keep this important factor in mind. And by the way, that was part of a stupid test. I was trying to create a general sky replacement training, which is one of the most stupid ideas I had when CopyCat first came out, and I didn't understand how it's even working. It's so stupid because first, when you try to affect and change a large pixels area like this, it literally takes forever to just reach the target reference frames, and it's super heavy to change all these areas. And secondly, because it's just so destructive and stupid to stamp something in some place knowing that you will never be able to reposition it or log develop it or anything at all. But yeah, we learned from these stupid experiments, and it's actually worked for some shots. The tracking was really good at some shots, and it replaced the sky. So who knows? While it's not literally match moving when we use CopyCat, as we don't really technically move anything, but by using CopyCat ability to recognize and stick to a group of pixels and recoloring and changing these pixels until they match our ground truth, we could kinda say that we match move our effect. So let's not focus on the wording and ignore it for now. And while match moving batches for cleanup purposes is fine, but on the other hand, inserting and match moving actual elements is generally a bad idea for most of the situation for many reasons. Mainly the destructive nature of CopyCat and the fact you have to restart the training if you did any small edit or enhancement to your ground truth frames, and also the fact that you can't insert anything that is animated, like a video, an animated banner, or whatever. So in 99% of the cases, it's a stupid idea, yes. Few exceptions would be in rare scenarios where we can leverage the power of CopyCat training, like a pre-approved look or something we already done before and we just want to replicate the exact thing again, maybe on a bunch of new shots coming on the last minute of a deadline or something like this, for example. So I have created a similar situation. In this similar but different angle shot from actionvfx.com, I have created a little general training to make CopyCat insert that wand, and it worked just perfect. Match moving and skin stretching is just incredible. No long hours struggling with manually tracking Mocha or even Smart Vector. It's just effortless. And I didn't do anything except preparing the dataset. One small challenge is that I had to put the wand in the exact correct position and perspective for all my reference frames, and that won't always be possible to do in all situations. But with a little trick, I managed to eye position the wand accurately here. Here is how. So simply after having the wand in the desired place where you're happy with, using a corner pin, disable it and move the 4 from points to the place you will be eye matching to, which are here's the lovely guide markers, so I can accurately position it in the exact middle of each marker like this. Then on the main corner bin tab, which is the 2 points, the target tab, I'll just copy the same positions from the From tab and that's it. So technically in this frame here, our corner bin isn't doing anything at all. But when we take that setup to a different reference frame, then we can use it. By eye matching the corner bin targets to our guide markers, I get the exact positions and perspective as my main reference frame or hero frame. And just checking that the position and perspective is matching by quickly flipping between your reference frames. Then it was a matter of repeating this for all the reference frames. For this motion blurry frame, I use the defocus just for the sake of the test, but you shouldn't do this. You should match the motion blur correctly, maybe by animating a some frames after and before, just to get the correct motion blur. So motion blur should be matched correct, defocus, and everything before running any serious training. Then it took me less than 30 minutes to repeat the process and prepare these 13 or 15 frames. Final input with ground truth checkup. Disable the multi-resolution option so I can interrupt the training at any time. And the result is so satisfying for me. I drop frame here when the strap is overlapping, understandable and easy fixable. Same in this area where it wobbles and fails to transition back. We can fix this by adding some reference frames or just manually fix them later. But it's definitely useful here. I can't believe I'm having this great tracking without doing any effort and actual tracking. Especially if we do more and more shots in the sequence, we can get them all done in no time, and it's just a matter of finalizing, fixing single edges and tech check, and that's all. But as I mentioned, that's in a very rare situation where the lock is approved or when it's your own VFX and you control the output here. Well done, CopyCat, 10 out of 10 here. So retouching, DeAging, and aging are really good uses for CopyCat, and it's all about making the ground truth frames matching to each other, which is easier at DeAging. Did a quick test here. Piece whitening, a little frequency separation and blurring to the skin details, and some hair coloring, pre-combing and applying the same setup to all the frames, then checking continuity for all the ground truth frames, then comparing them against the input just to make sure all crops and all frame order is matching. Nothing special with the settings, medium-sized training and multi-resolution is off as usual, and here is the training result. Works fine as expected. You get what you give to CopyCat, and that cheap 2D blurring retouching is something we usually do a lot, especially in commercials as well. So yeah, CopyCat could be really useful to get these silly retouches quickly. While the opposite, aging is a little challenging as we need to introduce the details, the face wrinkles and all, and it needs to be 100% matching between all the ground truth frames. So for my first test, I use this AI aging simulator website to get these different stages of aging, and it really gives nice and consistent results. But the results without subscription is low resolution. That's why I'm cropping the photo just to the face and not providing the full frame to get the best out of these low resolution images. And I just wanted something quick for the test, but if I do it again now, I would surely use StableDiffusion. And I'm gonna show you in the next example how to use it. So back in here, just some blending and mixing with the generated old age details image with the raw plate to the level you need, and I'm just keeping it subtle here. Not much aging. And here is the trainer result. Seems fine, disappears a little when she leans her head down as there is no reference frame here at all. And also that screen left under the eyes dark spot might be sliding or disappearing as well. One good way to investigate this problem is to exaggerate the effect. So by merge minus the result from the raw plate here, that gives us the effect. Then just multiply Nuke to exaggerate it. And then I'm putting it over the plate again to see it better and investigate the problem. This. And now I can see that dark under icing is sliding a little. And it also changes in intensity, a little bit fading here, indicating a mismatch in my ground truth frames. Yeah, a little darker in one frame than the other. That's why it's so important to check and fix any mismatch between these reference frames really accurately, because that's really crucial for copycat success. Details in this motion blurry area also needs to be motion blurred. Back to the normal level, quality-wise, the training almost reaches the target frames quality, but of course this shot needs a lot of work, mainly on the reference frames. We get the idea here, we just need a consistent and matching frames, matching in position, matching in intensity, everything, and the rest is copycat, Matchmoving, and tracking these details for us. So the problems are clear and fixable here. Similar training to the rest of the body scan with same fixable issue on the screen right shoulder. And by the way, these details are coming from StableDiffusion with a prompt of zombie scan, burnt scan, something like this. And StableDiffusion, Comfyui are really powerful tools you should include in your workflow, especially for creating cheap and quick effects like this face burned injury makeup. Same workflow could work with any AI generated cleanup batches or matte painting, maybe, and you just use the powerful tracking of copycat to stick it in. Technically, you should be able to stick your effect on any trackable surface with copycat. Here is an actual real application of this by Voxel Studios on this horror movie. Check out the full interview with the creator of this movie, and you will notice you're doing a really great trick of creating and training multiple AI looks with different details. And after you train all these different looks, you get multiple passes that you can merge and mix like a 3D renders until you get a look that you're happy with, which is really a great way doing complex look instead of having just one AI generated image to stack on top without any control. It's really also brilliant in creating the Asian details with good consistency. Here is how quickly, supposing you never used it before. So instead of manually installing it the complicated way, you can just use this amazing software, StabilityMatrix, which makes installing StableDiffusion, Comfyui, and all their models and plugins really easy with a really friendly user interface instead of installing everything manually or just YouTube your way in. Once you're in StableDiffusion, upload the hero frame into the M-Paint tab, mask the target face area, avoiding the eyes, and with a prompt like add wrinkles, old lady, or whatever. Here's the one I used in this example. It's all experiments, so just make sure you try a lot with a low resolution before you go high. And once you get something you like, save the seed number because you need to use the exact seed number to get the exact details on the other reference frames. That's the most important part. And also with the control net plugin or whatever they call it, there's a brilliant options, this open pose options that will help you match the details to the exact face orientation and perspective. I didn't use it here, but it's really brilliant. I'll just put the link to a tutorial explaining this that will help you match the details to the exact face orientation and perspective. I haven't used it here, that's why my details orientation of the face is a bit off. Some of the details are mispositioned between the reference frames, but that will do for me. Anyway, these are all AI generative issues that you need to learn how to deal with. You just need to make sure you get constant reference frames, and most important, while blending and mixing the details, you need to have the exact setup and values between all the reference frames. So if you're using like a Luma key or some rotos, you need to stick it to a fixed places like eyes, like the nose, just to keep everything exactly the same on the other frames in order to get the exact like intensities and fading of these details over the face. I think you understand what I'm trying to say here. And one more important part that we usually do with retouching is the actual transforming and warping of the pixels. We usually use it to make people like thinner, fix the jaw lines and all this retouching bullshit they make us do. I did a quick test here with a spline warp on her face. And yeah, CopyCat can warp the pixel just fine as well. That's great and would be a good mix with aging and DeAging. Recoloring and restoration of old footage and movies is so far one of my favorite uses of CopyCat. Here is a quick test on Ismaili as seen in the Navy, a 1957 Egyptian comedy movie. For my dataset, I used Palette FM website. I think it might be the best AI coloring website out there, and it gives us consistent coloring for the similar frames most of the time. With a free account, you can download a low-res watermarked results, but you can always steal the colors in Photoshop. I'm using GIMP here while blending it with your original quality frame and maintaining your original resolution and pixels quality. And surely you can do the same in Nuke. That's it. Black and white inputs with colored ground truths. Surely no cropping here. CopyCat is looking at the full frames. Another one here, working great for the buildings, but not for the old couple closes. The AI coloring gave me a different results, and I should have spent a few minutes unifying my reference frames, but I didn't, as usual. But who cares? It's proven to work great, especially tracking-wise, and it was surprisingly so fast to me. Maybe because coloring the pixels is an easy change to achieve, even though it's learning from full frames, but still was so fast to train. So I could actually recolor that whole movie if I just spend a day or two preparing a data set and create a general training. And it's not as hard as you think because most of these old movies are all like fixed cameras and actors staying like this talking the whole movie, talking for long times, and it kind of gets so repetitive. So yeah, why not? But just don't forget it will be limited to that movie you trained to because that's still CopyCat and it's not so smart yet. And there's already brilliant AI coloring tools out there that you can use. And I think restoration companies use these already. But anyway, with CopyCat, we still can train it to deal with the old footage artifacts and lens issues like this here because it's usually repetitive patterns and being over a black and white colors in the background makes it easier to train maybe. So it's worth trying and discovering. And all these videos are from Fabio's Film Restoration Center channel. He's a restoration expert and he's sharing his workflows on this interesting channel. Please check it out if you're interested. While pixel coloring is a great use of CopyCat, on the other hand, doing heavy style transfers like replacing this character completely is a bad idea because it looks like we're sticking an image on top of our character and it's lifeless. Even if you provide lots and lots of reference frames, the transition is just gonna be difficult, lots of flickering. It's just not something you should do because there's already brilliant AI generative tools that can generate each frame of the videos and create realistic results. We're just testing a different style transfer of the buildings here, and you can see with one frame only, the effect quickly breaks up. We definitely need more coverage, and of course, putting a flat image on top without respecting the footage depths and layering will never work. So maybe only light style transfers make sense with CopyCat, something like what the Foundry is offering with the style transfer model that's part of the CatteryTool, which does a simple painting-like style transfer. Upscaling has proven great use, and most companies integrated this already in their pipeline. But remember, it works best when you train it on the same footage. And doing it simple, you just pixelate your own footage by reformatting and downscaling it. Breaking the concatenation so you get a bad resolution to use as input. Then you use your plate as a ground truth, and that's it. That's a trick. There's lots of tutorial about it. I'll put some links, but remember, it's not magical. Just consider it as an amazing sharpening and enhancer of the existing pixels. And it's not like these AI upscalers that actually generates new data and information. And since I mentioned this, it's worth checking this brilliant implementation of the AI upscaling by Francisco Contreras. I hope I pronounced the name correct, but Here's it. You can check and use this AI upscaling node inside Nuke already. And it's worth following his account and checking the amazing tools he developed. DeBluring is also the same, as long as you can provide sharp details into your ground truth frames, and you get what you feed CopyCat. Here's a nice detailed video about DeBluring by Alfie on the Foundry channel. And remember, there is already the upscaling pre-trained models that we talked about earlier in the weight menu of CopyCat settings. Plus, give try to the CatteryTools pre-trained models, this one and this one. And that's it regarding upscaling and DeBluring. Let's move on to rotoscoping. Alright, to make it short, the best mattes you can get out of CopyCat is, as it's written here on the main tools tutorial by the Foundry, a garbage matte. They can't be any more honest with us, so don't expect so much out of it. And I don't know why it was an overestimated use when CopyCat first came out on Nuke 12 or 13. Maybe Foundry's marketing was focused on this matte creation, or maybe we were dreaming that we're not gonna do any more rotoscoping. But personally, my first uses back then was so disappointing, mainly because real production shots isn't usually as easy as the tool show-off tutorial and YouTube videos. But to also be fair, we shouldn't just say garbage mattes, because it really does great core mattes, and depending on the shot and situation, maybe that's all we need in some cases, and it's really useful for brevis and early comp stages as well. But just forget about any edge details. You're not getting any hairs or fine details ever with CopyCat matting. My personal choice for getting really good mattes for actual production is to use After Effects Roto Brush, which is really a very powerful and underestimated tool, along with Silhouette's Power Matte, and manually spending some effort, some sweat and tears to extract a good matte with nice edge details. Usually some faults and flickering, but you usually take it back to Nuke and do the usual treating, mixing with different gears and the usual stuff. And that's just the perfect workflow for me for freelancing, personal and low budget projects. And I know for sure that lots of mid companies that doesn't outsource their stuff are really depending on Rotobrush on their workflow, and it really pays off even for like high quality movies. You'd be surprised to see After Effects Rotobrush doing these, but it really pays off and it saves lots of time. So that's really my personal recommendation. After Effects Rotobrush and Silhouette, especially with the new AI tools coming in the new Silhouette version. That's a game changer. So yeah, CopyCat mattes aren't really competitive or useful against these tools, unless you're doing something really like a general training on sequence or pulling garbage mattes on a big amount of shots. Like this nice experiment by Halit Noor. Sorry if I mispronounce your name, but he's making a general model to create core mattes on a green screen plates. Generally, I would say before even thinking of using CopyCat or making any effort even on a single shot, you need to give a try to the K3 models that already can pull amazing mattes, like the ModNet model and the different segmentation models they have, as it really gets great result, almost same or close to the results you're gonna be creating with manual CopyCat matte creation. And if you're lucky with an easy footage that has nice, maybe luminance, contrast, or details are really seen and clear, easy to be separated, you're gonna find these models even pulling these details, giving you nice mattes. So it's really very experimental and varying between every different footage. So yeah, just be as mean as possible and try to find the tools that gives you the most usable matte as fast as possible, because in every method you're gonna take this matte and refine it and correct it anyway. So CatteryTools are simply just pre-trained and open source models that were implemented inside Nuke by the Foundry. And they are easily installed by just downloading them and putting them into a Cattery folder in your .nuke directory, and that's it. My personal favorite one is the Depths Creator, which I used before in actual project to make a nice fog, and it holds really nice. The depth layering wasn't shifting, it was really sticking to its place. So, and with some blurring and smoothing, it worked really nice for me. It could also be nice for some fake depth of field effect. And even better is the depth anything model, which is also implemented into Nuke by Rafael Silva, and it gives way better depth maps, especially at the edges, compared to the normal MI-1. Another nice model you should try is the denoising one if you don't want to pay for neat videos, reduced noise, which is essential for everyday combing. And it really doesn't make sense that a Nuke doesn't have a good denoiser until now. Also, there is some sweet segmentation models. The semantic segmentation gives a list of objects you can choose your target object from. And ModNet, a real-time human matting model, which sometimes gives really impressive hair and edge details, and it's really super fast. Then we have the newest segment anything model, which creates a cryptomat style mats, but it's not temporally consistent. So in each frame, it will be different colors. So it's not really useful for anything. Plus the BeautyWork face mats, which are not really pixel or edge perfect, but they usually stick really good, and you will be mixing these with our normal hue and luma keyer to select specific areas. Yeah, so this might be handy in some situation and definitely worth playing with if you haven't already. And there's also these models which are vector data creator that are supposed to work better than what the smart vector generates. I never tried it personally, but also as a nice surprise while recording the video, I found that they added the new Llama model just a few days ago, and it is supposed to be for removing elements in a way similar to the Photoshop content aware tool, but maybe better and smarter. And I'm really happy with it as a first impression. It's really a good addition for painting out simple stuff, repetitive patterns, and stuff that usually the normal invent node will fail with it. But still, it gets patchy sometimes. It fails with complex reconstruction of background because it's not an AI generation inventing tool. So yeah, that's normal, but it's really great addition to the CatteryTools, and it's definitely gonna be handy prepping out the simple stuff. Finally, check out this great recent video from Alex Villabon here going through the CatteryTools and explaining why we should all use them more. And I'm really glad I came across that video because first, it's the same purpose as my review here, to say that CopyCat and CatteryTools are underrated and not used much, even though they are out for years now, for 5 or 6 years. And I'm really happy to see someone else saying it. And secondly, because the channel has really some great tutorials with new ideas utilizing the AI tools smartly, like this one here, mixing Comfyui bar to generate normal maps and feeding these reference frames to CopyCat to create a normal maps out of any video, and also upscaling and some other cool tutorials. So yeah, it's worth subscribing and following. And since we mentioned normal maps, there's already an implementation that creates a real-time normal maps. It's called Design, and I tried it for simple relighting, and it really works impressive. It's by Francisco Contras again, and the most important that it gives a stable and consistent map. Using Comfyui and CopyCat to enhance Nuke's emitted particles look into a real-looking flames by Josh Parks, definitely both brilliant and practical. I can see it working great on the focus torches and far background set resin fire or candles. Making clouds by bending blowy strokes using CopyCat, brilliant and fun. Yes, I don't see it much practical. But wait, it's by the guy making the pixel badger tools, so who am I to say anything here? It's definitely amazing. But seriously, that tutorial itself is amazing, explaining how CopyCat actually works, and for some situation where the client or the soup is so picky on the cloud placement, that could be really helpful, especially if you take the output to Comfyui and enhance it further, taking the details and the resolution up to hold up to a production quality level. I'll put the link for a tutorial with that amazing trick. Another amazing use by ActionVFX team, mixing AI generated lights and CopyCat to make that cool lights casting on the actor's body as a result of the lighting effect that wasn't there on the raw plate while matching the environment's lights. Definitely brilliant. And I don't really understand why they didn't use the AI generated lights directly and just turn it on and off manually. Maybe they were doing a generic effect or something. We're not gonna know without the tutorial, and I was so shy to ask on the post because it's a 10 months old post. So maybe if someone has the tutorial, I couldn't really find it. Anyways, there's a similar approach here by Paranjal Chaudhary in this tutorial, mixing switch light and CopyCat to relight footage. A real brilliant one here where Federico is creating a roto controller to control the performance of a fake-made eye. The eye itself is produced by the inference node because he trained CopyCat on different poses of this eye as a ground truth and the corresponding roto shapes as inputs. It might be hard to understand this way, but he really explains everything clearly, so please check this amazing tutorial. And it's almost the same idea that was presented a few years ago in this Foundry talk about controlling and copying facial performance. And that one was a bit more complicated as he first trains CopyCat to create a UV or SD map for his face. Then he takes that UV output for another training as an input and his real face performance as ground truth. And the result from this training is being able to manipulate and control the facial performance. And we can argue all day that this isn't really practical and it needs like perfect conditions and footage to work, but you can't argue how brilliant is this. And there is no such thing as a general statement that this is not practical or not gonna work always, because almost everything can still be useful and be a solution in some scenarios. And that's why it's always important to understand and experiment with these tricks and just keep them on the back of your mind for when you might need them, or maybe never really need them with all the AI technologies coming so fast. So last one, I kinda saved the best to the end from a Foundry live streamed 1 month ago with VFX Soup Victor Braze and Luca Bristini, a researcher and machine learning specialist, where they presented a complicated painting sequence with CopyCat to paint out the sewers and some stuff on the ground. And as you can see, the main problem is so many people passing over the painting area and it's super long shots. And Luca presented a brilliant solution to make CopyCat automatically deal and kinda mask out and exclude these people from the training result. And he's doing it by feeding CopyCat fake data of crazy amount of different color variation. I'll post the YouTube link to this exact brilliant 5 minutes where he explains this, but the whole talk is really brilliant and they're sharing amazing tricks regarding the fake data, the identity frames, and creating consistent ground truth frames. It is just insanely beautiful talk and breakdown, especially that Victor Brace is also simplifying how CopyCat thinks and works really beautifully. So make sure you watch it if you haven't, and I really hope you'd be able to vote out the variation colors creation setup or put it into a tool out to the community, because it's like a reusable trick that could be really helpful to almost everyone on almost every CopyCat similar situation. So yeah, hopefully they share it or someone else recreate it and share it. CopyCat usually does good when it comes to bending out reflections. Think of the repetitive annoying tasks we get of sunglasses and mirror reflections with the cameraman or the film crew showing, and similar scenarios where the reflection is not completely contaminating the object, like it's not 100% covering the object, it has some transparency, or whenever we can create a consistent reference frames to feed CopyCat and make use of CopyCat's powerful tracking. So we could say it generally works great with reflection situations. Marker removals and small area effects, retouching and BeautyWork. On the other hand, it's a terrible idea to use CopyCat whenever the target surface is changing a lot, like an animated TV content, or in this case, a blinking eyes, where he moves and rolls his eyes so much. So in this example, I was kind of trying to make him eyeless, something like Neo sealed mouse in the Matrix. So even with providing lots of dataset frames covering the whole shot, still the effect doesn't hold up, as the change in eyes pixels behind it always breaks the effect. First try back then to fix it was stabilizing the shot by geo-tracking the head and unwrapping it. Then I did the training on the unwrapped map. I don't remember exactly what I was thinking, but I probably thought that by stabilizing, I would tell CopyCat that this batch stays in the same place, and that as well didn't work because even on the unwrapped map the eye blinking is still happening and CopyCat still sees it, and that method might have worked if I just trained it on the whole full range sequence of the unwrapped map, which is also a stupid idea because I just can't provide all the ground truth for the target frames with correct lighting, and it would be just stupid to leave the same batch all the way. Otherwise, then why use CopyCat? I would just put the batch on top and wrap it back without even including CopyCat, and that would be the normal way of doing it. But back to the CopyCat way. So all I just wanted for CopyCat to look at the surrounding eye areas and to disregard and not look to the eyes. So using the same track geo, I just blacked the eyes with the black roto on the RGB, and it's important for it to be tracked properly to stay consistent. So anyway, I just use this blacked out eyes as my input footage. The result is working. It still needs enhancement in the reference frames and some work, but the whole idea of blocking some pixels, it works in theory, which might be handy in sometimes when you can plug the moving pixels in a way that is consistent. But generally this is a failure for CopyCat because I already used GeoTracker to put my black roto on a consistent way. Otherwise it won't work because I already tried putting rotos in a manual way to the input frames and it didn't work because the roto was different in its shape in each frame, and CopyCat just couldn't understand it. But this is just not practical and rare situation, but who knows, maybe you got something animated annoying you and breaking your CopyCat training, so you could just block it somehow in a consistent way. And it doesn't have to be a pitch black roto, it could be any color or even a checkerboard. That would have worked better.
Your ideas are absurd. Yes!
So as a conclusion, I would say that while CopyCat is very limited with its close supervised training and having to provide a comprehensive dataset and make effort to get a working model, but when it comes to prep work, MatteCreation, it is still more reliable, predictable, and production ready than most of the new AI tools out there with all of their flashy capabilities and showing off reels. But when you actually use them, you suffer and you get nothing. And it's not really a fair comparison because CopyCat is not an AI tool. It's a machine learning that learns from the scratch. You start it on your own work, so it's not really a comparison, but CopyCat becomes powerful when you mix it with an AI tools. So when you use Comfyui, StableDiffusion, or Photoshop AI for generating stuff and then replicate them and copy them to different shots with CopyCat, and that's really the power of CopyCat, is processing on a sequence level, processing many shots in the same time, of course after getting a working successful model. And in the end, it's up to you finding the perfect use. You can still use it to do one shot if doing the data set and managing the training time is still less effort than making the shot manually. So yes, CopyCat can be really time saver for freelancers and small teams. And also, as we mentioned, big companies has the power of creating a powerful models by training on their old finished projects data. So that's the purpose of this video, is to highlight the pros and cons of CopyCat and say we should use it more. So I hope this video was useful. I'm closing it by these CopyCat using tips or summary. If you made it all the way here, thank you. Let me know in the comment if you have any thoughts, if I mispresented something, or if you have any question, please reach me out. I'm free these days and happy to help with anything. Thanks.